Good evening, everybody. So my name is Brett Kincairn. I'm the City of Boulder Climate Initiative's liaison staff to the Environmental Advisory Board. I'm going to introduce the protocol for our online public meetings. And after that takes place, we'll then let the chair kick off the meeting. So we're pleased to have you all join us to strike a balance between meaningful and transparent engagement and online security. We have these rules that we establish for all of our online meetings to ensure that these meetings can proceed effectively. So this meeting has been called to conduct the business of the City of Boulder. Any activities that disrupt, delay, or otherwise interfere with the meeting are prohibited. There is a time for speaking, the public comment period, in which if you're interested, you would have 3 minutes to speak. And that time is bounded to that point in the agenda. No person shall speak except when recognized by the person presiding, and no person shall speak for longer than that 3-minute period. Each person shall be registered to speak at the meeting using the person's real name. Any person that's using a synonym will not be permitted to speak. If someone comes into the meeting with a telephone number or a name associated with a specific device, the host may ask for a full name before allowing the individual to speak. No video is permitted except for the ones that are actually recorded as a part of this meeting, and all others other than the invited speakers will be by voice only. The person presiding at the meeting shall enforce these rules by muting anyone who violates the rules. If the chat function won't be enabled except to Heidi, who is basically administering the meeting, and the chat is only used for technical questions. There's no back and forth with any of the participants. And only the host and the individuals designated by the host will be permitted to share their screen during the meeting. Okay, with that, Marty, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Brett. So we'll call the meeting to order to start our meeting here on the 7th of April. Welcome, everyone. And what we're going to do, I think, first in the agenda is we're going to, of course, welcome Hernan Villanueva. Do I pronounce your name correctly, Hernan?
Yeah.
Okay, close enough for government work. Well, welcome. And I know that we have a procedure to have you do an oath of office. So perhaps we'll do that. And Heidi, would you administer that, lead us, or how do we do that?
I believe Hanan has the.
I got the document, so I could read it.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Okay. Shall I go ahead?
Yep.
All right. I, Carlos Hernan Villanueva, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America and of the State of Colorado and the Charter and ordinances of the City of Boulder, and faithfully perform the duties of the office of a member of the Environmental Advisory Board, which I am about to enter. Okay.
Perfect. So I'll introduce this next section because it's a little awkward for Marty to do this. The process that the Environmental Advisory Board has historically used for the selection of its chair and vice chair is simply the seniority process of the board members going through the offices. So as you can see on the website, the terms are all staggered so that we only have one person leaving the board each year. And that sort of sets up a nice cycle by which eventually every person on the board gets to serve in the vice chair and chair's role. And so since Marty is in his last year term, then he has the honor of being your chair for this year. And then the person who is the second most senior person would be the vice chair, in this case, Michael San Clemente. So unless other boards do operate differently, but this is the way this board has operated for a very long time. So unless anybody has any concerns or wishes to challenge that approach, then we would simply go through essentially a formality to endorse Marty to be the chair and Michael to be the vice chair. So Marty, I'll turn it back to you.
Okie doke. Well, it's a pleasure being chair. I assume that the votes have been counted and that the results were unanimous. And Mike will join us here shortly. What I'd like to first do is have us look at the minutes from the last meeting on the March 3rd, which, and I was looking at the minutes, and I know typically we are pretty quick in approving those minutes and seconding that, but I'd like to maybe just pause for a brief moment. In part, Hernan, you weren't fully involved in the meeting last month, and we had minutes that seemed to be longer than most typical minutes. We had a lot that happened in the last meeting. A lot of ground was covered, and we'll keep circling back to some of the issues. They're not by any means resolved. And I just wanted to point out a couple of items before we approve those minutes. And one that struck me, I just wanted to circle back to very briefly, was from the student presentation, which I really enjoyed, and had to do with the GIS Interactive Story Map. That was a recommendation that came out of the student project, which is intended to provide Boulder residents with information about the actions that they could take if air quality is deemed to be poor in a particular region and a particular day. And I know we've also talked a lot about simply monitoring to know what is the air quality. And that's, of course, the first thing you need to know, well, what are we talking about? But even if you knew, the action may not be obvious. And I really like this aspect because we'll circle back to this in terms of other ways that I think our board is working with the city, and that is to think about the information flow that goes back to the city and eventually back to the residents about how they can be sort of, let's say, environmentally intelligent. They have a sense of their space, and they also have a sense of their actions. So I just want to emphasize, I thought that was an important part of the student project, and we'll see how that, if that develops. It's a recommendation. So it wasn't clear to me whether that recommendation goes to the city or to whom. And then I just wanted to maybe toss that out. Does anyone have a sense as to who would act upon some of the recommendations that came out of the student project?
Well, this is, we'll talk about this more when we get into the topic of air quality down below. I think we've started to see is that air quality is an issue that falls into a gap within the city. That's been an area that's typically been the county's purview. And so theoretically that would go to the county, but I think we're starting to see that there's some need for the city to take action, but we haven't quite figured out how to proceed with that.
Okay, great. And you know, this sort of tied into Jonathan Cohen's presentation to us, that's also in the minutes, which was where he was introducing some of the community climate action plan. We'll come back to the action plan on today's agenda, which is important for this committee, I think, to the board to discuss. But he talked about resilience, and you know, part of resilience building is also knowing how to act when the situation requires moving out of harm's way. And so I just want to come back to that as part of the resilience strategy, the informing and empowering the public with what their options are when situations in the environment are a threat to them is really important, and I think is part of something that we should be returning to in the EAB as we work to advising the city. All right, I think that's just what I wanted to take away from the minutes of last month's meeting. Any other comments that you want to add? If not, we can move forward to approve the minutes. So hearing no objections, I'd say let's approve the minutes, and if we can second that approval.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it came down to the race as to who can find their mute button fastest. Thank you, Susan. So now we have public participation, and we saw the terms of that participation. We have two people joining us. Welcome to Paul and Ryan. And perhaps in the order, I'm just looking from left to right, if Paul would like to begin with his comments for 3 minutes. So Paul.
Okay, I'll just take a minute. Want to congratulate Herman for being on the board. I'm totally impressed with your resume and your public presence during the question and answer period. You did a great job, and I'm sure you do a great job on the board.
Thank you.
And congratulations, Marty, for being chair. So you may or may not know that I'm totally focused on stopping burning fossil fuels. That's the source of a lot of our air quality problems, as well as a lot of other problems. And I'd like to see the board do whatever they can in terms of let's burn fossil fuels not at all, or at least as little as possible. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. And Ryan, if you would like to take your 3 minutes.
For sure. Good evening, everyone. I don't have any planned comments tonight. I plan mostly to listen in and kind of get a feel for advisory board here. I mostly spend my time listening to the Transportation Advisory Board and getting up to speed there. But I know that the environment is highly tied to our form of transportation, and I will second Paul's comments on, our transition away from fossil fuel burning as soon as possible. So, yeah, happy to just listen in tonight. Thank you all.
It's great to have you, Ryan, and Paul. Again, thank you, both of you. So I think at that point, just looking at the agenda, we have no public hearing items on this month's agenda that I see here. So that takes us to discussion items. And maybe also just sort of maybe a matter of future meetings in which we may have presentations from staff or other people who bring information to the board that we need to consider that's relevant to the EAB, such as we had Jonathan give a presentation. We had last month, we also had Carol give a presentation. Carol Elam gave a presentation on air quality at the local level. And that is to consider how we would actually interact with a Q&A. And we've been pretty liberal about how we've been doing that. That's worked for the most part, but maybe to give it structure, especially now with a new member, Hernan, on board. I think it might be nice when we do have presentations given to us, formal presentations, that the chair or the vice chair, whoever is in the seat at the moment, basically solicits a roll call that will go sequentially through the board members, so everyone will know they'll have an opportunity to ask for a clarifying question regarding the presentation that was just shared. And so I'll try to do that to make sure that everyone, to manage that and regulate it, that everyone has a moment in which they can give a clarifying question. And then also the speaker will know that they're going to get some feedback or clarification forthcoming, for which they can provide an answer to those. And so in this manner, we have some structure. We know that we'll all get a say in what we heard, and likewise the speaker will have a structure for which they can clarify some points that weren't clear. So if that's okay with everyone.
I'm sorry, Marty, have you just had experience in the past where you haven't felt like you've had your questions addressed?
No, not really. But I think it just is a good way of I think, running the meeting, rather than just having us jump in sort of sporadically without structure.
Miriam, this is actually the process that Marty's describing is the process that was used for quite a long time. And just to embellish it just slightly, it's really got, you typically would have two rounds for the board. The first round is to ask questions, just to make sure that the board understands what was being presented. And then the second round is for the board members to be able to make comment. And part of what that enables is for us to be able to track the commentaries more clearly in the notes, and to be more effective in being able to be responsive to those comments.
Great, yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I forgot about the statement part of it too. And this will make it easier for Heidi. And in looking back at last month's notes, Heidi, you did an amazing job of transcribing all the conversations. So thanks for doing that. So hopefully this will make it a little bit easier for you. Okay, so again, welcome to Hernan, and maybe if I can just invite you to say a few things about yourself. We didn't all participate in your presentation to council. So if you can take a moment or two just to tell us who you are and what your interest is here and what you hope to achieve, and what this board hopefully will achieve together with you.
Okay. So my full name is Carlos Hernan Villanueva, but I go by my middle name because there are a lot of Carloses in my family alone. In my house, there were like another 2. So, you know, it can get confusing quickly. I'm originally from Peru. I grew up in Lima, and I came here to the US when I was 17 to study. So I ended up in Kansas, the University of Kansas. I studied engineering there for 4 years. Then I moved to Boulder back in 2011 to study my PhD, also in engineering. And I graduated in 2016. And currently I'm working for Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California. But I was able to work out a deal with them where I can work, you know, from Colorado, which is nice. And what I said in my during my interview process with City Council was, I think I'm interested in improving if the efficiency of residential and commercial buildings built. So that means like you know, work with the building codes to ensure that new construction meets certain efficiency goals. And I believe that that is the most bang for your buck that you can get in terms of you know, reducing energy waste. And my second approach, and something that I would like to work on with the board, hopefully, is try to whenever we think of a new project or a new initiative here, to always consider the ability to be able to reproduce this in lower income communities, because I sincerely believe that, you know, while Boulder has a lot of good initiatives and a lot of good ideas, sometimes this can be pricey. And I feel like, you know, fighting climate change and achieving our goals is going to be a group effort, not at the city level, but, you know, the county level, then at the state level, and then at the federal level. So if we can take into consideration the cost that other communities may have to incur to, you know, implement their goals, maybe that will give us a better chance of convincing our neighbors to also participate in our initiatives, and that way we can reach our goals together. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Welcome to the board. And I don't know, Hernan, if you were on listening into last month's call, but I'm just kind of scrolling back to my own little chicken scratch notes here that I can read. Carolyn talked about you know, achieving net zero for building codes. Mm-hmm. And it was a term that I wasn't quite sure how the city is defining this, or at least how she was using it in her presentation. Let me be specific. And what she was describing, the goal to get to net zero for buildings and the code that's required to achieve that, is that once a structure is built, that it would generate energy itself that's equal to the consumption of energy by that building. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of your understanding of how to achieve a sort of net zero, at least for the architectural and engineering aspects of buildings?
Yes, but I don't know how at least short-term net zero is in terms of feasibility, but I do feel that, you know, if not net zero, we can get close to zero by enforcing in the building codes use of like new insulating materials that you can now find at Home Depot, or yeah, basically that, right? Like new materials that are now available and are cheap enough at like a Home Depot or a Lowe's that contractors can use for their projects, and basically reduce the energy waste, you know, the energy consumption of a home or or a building. And something that I also mentioned to City Council is maybe push harder with the, what's the official term, like rebates, I guess, or tax credits that people could use, both, I guess, contractors and the citizens of Boulder, to be able to retrofit their homes to meet these efficiency goals. Because I guess, for example, if I wanted to add more, my house was built in the 50s. I could add more insulation, and luckily I could afford it, right? But maybe like for other members of the community, it might be a tougher sell because your return on investment is 10 years down the road. So what's your incentive to do it now if it's 10 years down the road and it's going to cost you a lot of money now? So maybe we could just give them that little push with, I don't know, tax incentives or more rebates. Maybe they will be more motivated, especially landlords, because I know the city of Boulder has smart regulations. I don't remember the official name, that program that they have to meet certain criteria. But if we wanted to go a little further, I do think, we need to go into the tax credit realm.
Marty, I wonder if maybe the board could all just briefly introduce themselves to Hanan.
Thank you. Okay. Susan, would you like to start?
Sure, Herman. I was the new kid on the block until you got here, so thank you for that. This was my first year on the Environmental Advisory Board, and my background is also engineering. I studied civil engineering and practiced structural, and then moved to electrical. And I have a master's in business as well, and I've been active in all kinds of environmental issues around the city, primarily having to do with renewable electricity. But I'm also very interested not only in individual homes being net zero, but in our urban planning in general being a lot greener, a lot more regenerative, and taking a look at our land use codes and zoning codes. And I've been attending the planning board meetings, just bringing myself up to speed on that a little bit, so that as an environmental advisory board member, I can hopefully contribute to moving that in the right direction.
Great.
I think actually we have met before. I think you were there last year, and I was there too. Getting in. Did you start your term last year?
Yes.
Okay, then yeah, I think we must have talked for like 2 minutes last year when you were waiting for your interview. So I'm pretty sure I recognize your face. So
I probably look a lot younger now.
It's nice seeing you again, I guess.
You too.
And Miriam.
Okay, I'm Miriam Hacker and have been on the board for a lot longer than it seems like I've been on the board. For at least 3 years now. I'm also an engineer, but my specialty is in the air quality realm, environmental and air quality realm. And I've been focused on helping the city and the EAB move towards addressing air quality in the city and the region on a more active level. That's primarily what I do.
Has been exercising remarkable patience, I might add.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And Hernan, I'm Marty Hurling. And when I joined the board, my hair was your color. And you see what happens when you're on this board too long. So I wish you better luck. But no, I'm just kidding. This has been an exciting board to be part of because it is an important problem. And we hear that from the public. And of course, we're all on this board for very similar reasons. I'm actually a climate scientist. I work for NOAA. And I've been doing climate change research for quite some time. And so I'm very interested in some of the meteorological manifestations of climate change that would matter in a area like Boulder. So we are concerned about flood risks and how those might be changing. So there's a resilience to flooding that is something of interest to me. And then there's the heat island and just a heat wave heat island concern that comes together as a sort of a compound problem with the air quality. So Miriam's doing a great job in discussing the air quality concerns and how we monitor. And climate change is working in a way to probably promote more fires, just because of the drying effect in our forests and the community. But then also on top of that is the heat that comes along with it almost at the same time. So how are we resilient to dealing with that? And the equity, different parts of the community may be more resilient than others. And so all these are interesting topics for me, and I'm glad to be on the board for those reasons and be able to engage the city as they need some information that can be provided by this board. So I think with that, we can move on, and I think we have an air quality update, perhaps some next steps. And this goes back to Brett and Miriam, who've been working on this problem a little bit since the last meeting. Any new updates?
Yeah, Miriam, I'll start and then please fill in. I think, as I mentioned before, Miriam has been a real leader in bringing to our attention some huge gaps that we have around both the availability, the quality, and the accessibility of information about air quality. And I think as part of that process, it's been underscoring something that we learned last fall when we had the fires, which is that we don't have a well-developed city-based response process around bad air quality events like the fire, particularly for those who may be most at risk. And so I think the sort of positive or the effective first step is that we've kind of surfaced the problem. I think where we now sit is trying to figure out what the next step should be for the city. The city doesn't really have any department that's charged with tracking and addressing either air quality or air quality risks. Typically that's a county public health function. And I think because of the work that Miriam initiated, the county convened a regional roundtable, and that from that there will be some steps toward improving the information side of that. And that's something I guess, Miriam, I'd love to hear your thoughts about, kind of what you think the next steps are going to be based on that regional group and where there might be gaps around that. In a meeting that Miriam and Carolyn and I had recently, I think what still remains to me as a place where we don't really have any clear sense yet of how to proceed is around how we prepare the community for the next bad air quality event and make sure that people who are most at risk have some access to ways to mitigate that risk for them. So let me stop there, and Miriam, please carry forward.
Sure. So as Brett mentioned, I have been, well, maybe he didn't mention this. I've been participating in the regional meetings that have been occurring around this topic. There have been two groups established among the different city representatives, city and county representatives. Everybody from at least the Front Range region is participating, and then there's also other cities around the state that are participating as well in this effort. There's one group that's focused on the messaging that will be put forth, and the idea is to try to have consistent messaging and messaging that can be well understood by all of the population. And so there's CU professors, there's CSU professors, there's other advocates that have also been involved with this group that is helping the city's representatives formulate the best type of messaging and way to put it forth. And I have not been directly associated with that group, but I am party to the notes and everything. And I can actually share that with with our board. Would that be something I should do? Brett?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can share the minutes from both of those meetings for you guys. The other group that has been meeting is around the data, the air quality monitoring data that is being collected around the state. And how do we present that data? How do we put it into a format that is understandable? And what is kind of very exciting right now is you guys have all, or some of you have met Michael Ogletree, who is City of Denver specialist. He has already initiated a program where he has the platform that will be used, or that he's proposing will be used to put the data or collect data and then be able to distribute it from. And he's invited all of the different city representatives and counties to share their air monitoring data and have it available from this same resource. There's still a lot of question about, how the presentation will look. That'll be coordinated with the messaging group, of course. And there's still a lot of detail to be worked out, but Michael is at the point right now where he is trying to gain or to establish agreements with the different cities and counties to share the data. And that's kind of the level we're at right now. We have another meeting that will be happening in the next week or so to really work through some of those details. We also, I insanely volunteered to help lead that group with Michael. So I am going to get to participate in a meeting that he's having with Maricopa County, which is in Arizona, which has a very robust program that they use and present data through. So we're going to try to learn from them and how they put their system together as well. But I will go ahead and share those notes. I think you all will be very interested with the messaging notes as well.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in the, so I think, Miriam, thank you. There's these two tracks that this regional initiative that Miriam, actually, frankly, you really stimulated coming together. But there's these two tracks then. One is around data gathering and synthesis and integration, and the other is around messaging. One of the things that we noted in our last conversation is that even if we can get the information better integrated and better presented in some sort of, say, website context, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are most vulnerable will be able to access it, because they may not go to websites or what have you. And so I think one of the gaps that we acknowledge that we need to consider somehow is, how do we determine what the most effective way to get that information once it's more effectively aggregated and presentable is.
So Brett, can I just
yeah,
butt in here just a little bit? I know that the messaging group is addressing that as well. And so that is a topic that's of high level of concern for the whole region. There's a lot of talk around how do we get to the right people, the people that really need to know the information.
okay.
So that is part of that group's focus as well.
That's great. So I do want to come back around and ask more about your thoughts around this sort of almost more like emergency response or incident response kind of context. But on the data side, you've been a strong advocate for figuring out ways to promote more of the what are they called? Purple hearts or what?
Purple air.
Purple
They're
air.
sensors. They're air quality sensors that measure particulate.
So do you still think it's useful to try to somehow sponsor more adoption of that censoring around the city?
Well, in talking to some of the other players and to Michael, they think that we have, a fairly robust set of monitors in Boulder already, just through citizen scientists putting them up. So there's actually a fair amount of data already present here, if that is all that's going to be implemented. The other thing, ozone is the other focus of this group. It's not just particulate. And we do have a CDPHE ozone monitor up at the reservoir. And both of those pollutants will be the focus of the data collection and presentation, and then also, how to react, the reaction thereof from, but I think, we have a certain level of monitoring available to us. I think we can start with what there is, especially, Michael is pushing this very hard because everybody's talking about getting everything going and done by June when the fire season starts.
Wow.
So it's kind of a manic push at the moment.
So this all sounds really positive, Miriam, and actually
Yeah.
seems like we're moving in the direction that you were hoping we would go.
Right.
What about this last category of, it's one thing to know that the air quality is bad, and it's another thing to be able to do something about it. And I forgot that one of the people we had on the phone was a gal named Elizabeth Crow, who works for the city and who did a lot of environmental justice work. And she made the comment, I think it was very important to remember, that just giving somebody information is actually sometimes counterproductive, because if they can't act on that information because they don't have the resources or for any other reason, then it's actually an act of disempowering them, because we're saying essentially, okay, now you have the information, it's your responsibility, even if they can't actually do something about it. So that we need to be very cognizant about how we're also setting people up to be able to act effectively. And I'm wondering what your thoughts, Miriam, are about where we stand and what our options or needs around that might be.
So I really liked what Elizabeth had to say. I think it's very important. She was mentioning pulling in community leaders like church leaders and community organizers that are involved with the lower income communities. Those are the people that we need to reach out to and get on our team to help distribute the information that needs to be distributed.
Yeah.
That was the primary point I pulled from what she said.
Yeah, again, part of what I think about, though, is just because a family might know that it's unsafe for their kids to be outside, or for their elders to be outside, if they don't have the $300 it takes to go buy an air quality monitor, that's not going to help them much. And then sometimes
they don't need the monitor. They need the stuff to put inside their house to make their house safe, right? An air filter. Yeah.
Right.
So, that goes to Hernan's way of thinking, perhaps, and how do we make our houses safer and make our buildings more tight and efficient. There's a lot of work that can be done in that arena, and there's a lot of work that has been done. There's a lot of air filters out there because of the fire seasons that have occurred in California and all over the states. There's a lot of information out there and resources. We just need to help find it and bring it to people's attention. There are low-cost options out there. Or maybe it's something the city provides to people, maybe it's, a program where this is something that we'll give you.
Susan, I saw you. Yeah.
Yeah, the part that really resonated with me about what you said, Brett, was if we don't know what the sources of air pollution are and what we can do about them, it can be disheartening to people just to feel like it's something that's out of their control. And, we do a really good job, I think, on the city's website of capturing our greenhouse gas emissions and what the key sources are, but we don't do that same kind of thing for air quality. And I don't know, is that because that's too hard or because people don't really want to know? But I would like to see as much transparency about the sources of our air quality as I see about our greenhouse gas emissions, which are related, but not the same.
So historically, Susan, the city has completely relinquished all control of air quality over to the county. And so the county's website does address air quality, and they do a pretty good job. I don't know, you can take a look at their website and see if you find it understandable and helpful. But I mean, that's a point that I've been trying to make to Brett, like, and I feel like a broken record. But
Well, I'll
it's
bring
very,
her on then.
it's pretty, it's pretty easy for the city really to just put up another webpage, you know, that addresses air quality. It's not that hard. Or, you know, add to their existing website. Brett pushes back on me on that one because he doesn't think that people will go there. He doesn't think it will be an effective mechanism to get information to people.
No, and just to clarify, I'm not in any way against, and I think we probably should stand up something. There's two things about that. One is because of what you've done so far, Miriam, I think you've caused the county to rethink its own website. I haven't seen them change it yet, but they're making noise about improving that. And then the second part of that is we should then, I think, somehow track or be working in tandem with them for whatever we're going to do. And I guess I've been sort of waiting for this messaging and communications work that you're saying is going to happen before we try to stand up something that's independent of what that best sort of practice is.
That's absolutely right. I think that's the right route to go because what at least these groups are proposing is that we give consistent messaging and information among the different cities and counties. So I think that's a good thing to do.
And I will say, I think the public is a lot more attuned to it after almost 2.5 straight months of smoky days in Boulder last year, right?
Right.
And it looks like we're working up to another fire season where that's going to be the same. So air quality just needs, in my opinion, to be a lot more front and center. And I thank you for all the work you're doing on it, Miriam.
You're welcome.
Ernan had his hand up. Yep.
Yeah.
Mention, I just tried to send out a link, but you can't get it online without a subscription. But there's a great article in National Geographic this month on air quality and the relationship to public health with great stats around the world. And of course, Armand, the relationship between low income communities and the terrible impact on public health is more severe in places around the world where they burn terrible fuels and that kind of thing. But it's a really great article if you have a chance to check it out.
Yep, Ernan, definitely.
Okay, so I am new to all of this. So I have a lot of questions here written down. So I wonder what's the best or maybe most effective way for me to get caught up if I should just, hog a lot of time right now and just ask you the questions, or if we should just talk separately, you and I, Miriam, and you can catch me up with
So Arnan,
like everything.
I think what might be very helpful is if I send you the notes from these meetings. That could potentially help you understand at least what's happening on a regional basis at this point. And then I'm happy to talk with you now or any other time.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Maybe. Yeah. I'll start that way. Maybe let me check the meeting so I can kind of understand the status quo, and then from there, whatever I don't understand or if I need more information, I can just ask you that.
Sure.
So in terms of thinking about next steps, Miriam,
Can I ask a question
Sure,
before
Frank.
we jump to the next? And this is sort of my experience with systems that seek to collect data and systems that seek to inform basically what the message is from those data that are meant to engage some response. And so, I've worked in the past with the National Drought Information System, which is sort of there's an analogy here, right? The drought information system collects indicators of drought, and they may be monitored from different sources. And then they message that into a product that is meaningful at a scale to which people experience that phenomena. And then presumably there's some response. This could be a countywide response for drought declaration. It could be a variety of things. Another example would be fire risk. If you go into our national parks, especially in the warm season, you'll see there's a dial, a very simple dial that says high risk or low risk or no risk. I figured all the categories. It's cute. It reminds me of the old Smokey the Bear cartoons, and that they would advertise it that way. And so that is also an early warning system.
Right.
And it was informed presumably by some local knowledge about the cumulative conditions on stress of vegetation and risk related to future expectations and crowd issues. But they're easy.
So,
the communication, just real quick, the communication is very simple. There's a simple dial that anyone who enters a park sees. And so what I'm wondering here, this is my question, and Marianne, sorry to take so long to get to it, is there a simple, visible early warning that can be provided either through, it could be sort of a location within a community that has an indicator, could be a color indicator, could be a dial or something that says low risk, high risk air quality today, that translates all of the data and all of the expert assessment of that data into a item of statement?
yes, there is discussion among the messaging group about using a flags to identify what the air quality is, the level of danger that the air quality is under at a particular time. The problem is creating a system where an understanding of those levels is well understood, right? And the nice thing about those dials is it has high fire danger or low fire danger, and it's really easy to understand what that means, right? So, but what if you see like a red flag? How do you know that means the air quality is so bad you should not go run outside today? How do you interpret that color or put that interpretation out there so that people truly understand what that means? And that's
sort of a jogger with a cross through it, right? Wrong message, maybe.
But I mean, that's the conversation that's happening among this group. And how do we get the very simple method of information out to the world? Got
it. My sense is for most people, the data is above their heads, and really it needs to be synthesized by the experts who can work with the data for other purposes too, including science and research. But basically at the end of the day, you just want a widget that boils it all down to, okay, what do you want me to do today? What's
good or
in my best
bad?
interest?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. I saw Hernan had another follow-up. And welcome, Mike. By the way, you can see Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Mike will introduce himself to Hernan in a moment here.
Okay.
So is the problem the early warning or just the warning in general? Like that's what I'm having issues understanding. Like if I go to my phone and I open the Apple weather app, I can see the air quality right now.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I go to Bouldercast, which I know is pretty popular here in Boulder, I can also see the air quality. They don't match exactly. But is that the problem? Or, and then it says, I usually look at the air quality on my phone.
Yeah, me too. Like it's right there, like the purple to yellow, right? That's
and you know how to interpret that. right?
Yep.
I mean, does the phone app give you a good indication
says,
of
like,
what that means?
good or
Yeah.
bad or hazardous or don't go outside or dangerous in a big word right above it.
Right. Okay. And I mean, who knows what that's based on, what data that's based on, right? But
There's a problem. There's a problem in the data because, like, if I open, it says, more data. There's a right here.
where is that measurement coming from? Is that coming from the
So, yeah, so it's,
airport in Boulder? Is that coming from Denver? Is that coming from? I mean, that's the problem.
because it says, like, I mean, it's so convenient because I already have my phone, right? I don't have to do anything else.
Right. And
This,
actually the system of data collection and identification that Michael is proposing includes a phone app where you can actually, geolocate monitors that are closest to you that can tell you exactly what the air quality is, where you are.
but I mean, but that would involve people installing an app.
Right.
Wouldn't it be better? I guess I would suggest, like, just provide the data for free, so then companies like this one can just use it.
The
Because I
data,
mean, if I have to
but I
install
mean,
an app,
what, everybody's not going to use the same thing, right?
well, I mean,
Like,
this is a weather app, right? It just comes to installing all iPhones. Like, I mean, yeah, it's not used by everybody, but a huge chunk of people, I'm sure. And I'm sure, like, Android comes with a default weather app, and then you have Bouldercast, which is really popular on Reddit, and then you're targeting a huge chunk of the population. I mean, not many people go for a specialized weather app. I just use this because they already came with my phone.
well, I
So,
do. I go to National Weather Service to get my air data.
yeah, but
Thank you for doing that, Mary.
yeah, but this is your field, right? I mean, I'm talking about, this is not, weather is not my thing. So, I mean, this is more than enough information that what I need. I'm just
But
saying
is
because,
it? That's the question. Is that good information for you?
I think I see Hernan's point though, because like I was kind of talking about this with my wife, and like she's not a scientist at all. She hates science. She's like, I think math is for calculating tips and nothing beyond that. Like that's her kind of view of the world. And she's like, I would never download an app about air quality because it's already on my phone. Like I don't care. That's too much information. Like I just want to look at what comes there. I don't want to know more than that because I don't care.
Okay,
Like,
but would a flag work for her? If she saw a flag that said
as long as she never had to actively seek out the flag beyond what
orange,
is the default on her phone.
yeah, I mean, like,
I see Hernan's point.
I guess,
yeah.
thinking part of my background was, my wife has an online business where she teaches art and calligraphy, like it's super visual. And I've done studies on how people interact with the blog. And these studies I've done, match other studies that I've seen from other websites where people don't read anything. Like they just look at the pictures. And, if you have to make, like just adding, like let's say, somebody wants to buy something on the website, adding a few extra steps results in a significant loss of sales. Like it's like a funnel, like everybody who lands on the website, then the more steps you add, the less sales you make. So I started optimizing it such that people can just like Amazon, it's like click, 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 done. I'm done. I bought the thing. So it's like, I feel like if you have to make people get an app, you're gonna like lose a huge chunk of your target audience already. Like, I feel like it will be better, and this is of course just my opinion, but like target what people already have. Like, okay, so this weather app that Apple installs on all iPhones, where does it get this data? And
right?
how can we
Where does
make
it get the data?
yeah, but how can we make it such that whoever is getting that data can access the data from the state that is going to be more I mean, it's beneficial for them, right? Because they have an incentive to provide good data. Like that's an incentive as a private business. That's how they make money. So if the data is already there for free, why wouldn't I use it as a business and improve my, my reputation? And then it's like Bouldercast. I mean, they're local, so it will be easy to contact them and ask them, where do they get how do you get your data? How can we make it easier for you? Like if I go to the Bouldercast website right now, I can see the air quality, and they said, we get this data from this weather station in Boulder. It gives you the location.
Yeah, that's done through NCAR. That one I trust. But I mean,
So yeah, what I'm saying is like, why wouldn't we help them get better data? And I mean,
they
people
already
already,
have the data. They're using the same data that this would use.
yeah, so people already use the service then, right? Like I'm saying like, if you provide a new app or a new service, you're gonna have a barrier of entry because people have to download something. You have to tell them to download it first. Then they have to actually have the will to download it, and then they have to actually use it.
Okay,
I mean,
so maybe not everybody's going to use it, but just not making it available is, I mean, why would
no,
you
I'm not
make
saying
it
no, I'm not
available?
saying not making it. Well, are you talking about the app or the data?
No, the data is available. I mean, the purple air sensor data is available. You can go to Fire Air Now website and see the air quality according to the sensors right now.
So
You
what's the
know,
problem then? So the problem is getting people to see
because
the data?
people don't look at that.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, that's a behavioral problem. Like, it's hard to get people to do things.
It's just a resource to be able to get the information into a format that is translatable. It's
Maybe I
But
can just interrupt
then
here a little bit, just to, because I know where you're going, Hernan, and these are great conversations. And, you know, and I followed what you just said. I went to weather.com just to see what they have under air quality. It says it's 49. It says it's good. 49 is a good number of claims. And then it said you can get details, and I clicked on the details. And so do we know, and this is back to Miriam, there are, let's see, 6 different constituents that are being monitored by someone in some location. There's ozone, and there's a value. There is sulfur dioxide. There's a value. There's PM10, PM2.5, carbon monoxide, and NO2. Right. And so where are those numbers actually coming from? And if I read that here, you know, I'm west side of Boulder, and, you know, wherever we are in our homes, is that number relevant to where I'm at right now in the manner in which we want it to be relevant for our community?
no.
So is that the problem that you and your folks are trying to address, is to make it more specific to our very local needs?
I want to have something available to the community, and maybe the iPhone app is good enough. Maybe that is enough impetus for them to go solve their problem. But having the actual data available doesn't hurt anything. I mean, having it available, you know, they're already the data is being collected, and the region is going to try to do something that's a consistent message, a consistent level of information that is translatable to the general public and understandable. I mean, these apps are maybe good enough. Maybe they're good enough for people to just get on and say, okay, the air quality's good. Or the air quality's bad. I'm not going to go outside today. But I don't know how many people do that.
I think sorry, go ahead, Miriam.
The first step is just having the data available. The second step is, what do I do? And how do you help your community take care of themselves?
Yeah, I think maybe there's, I keep hearing 3 steps. There's getting the data that we have confidence in. There's communicating it to the community, and then there's the capacity to do something with the knowledge that contains. And so it seems like maybe where we are in this process is, and you've said, Miriam, that everybody's on a fast track because of the coming fire season, which is great. So it seems like we will probably have some at least interim products, like you're leading or co-leading the process on the data side. And there's another group that's working on this communication and messaging piece. And so I think maybe we should come back to reviewing what those efforts have developed or generated, maybe sometime May or early June. And then I think what I just sent an email out to Colin Tom, who's been leading this at the county, to ask this question of what then are we doing, especially for those at most risk, to help them act on the information they're getting, if they're getting it. And I'm interested to see what she says in response. So I copied you on that, Miriam. And I think that's one of those areas that I'm not sure I'm hearing what what we're doing. There might be people who are working on that piece. I just don't know. And it's probably the piece that the city most, I mean,
Is most interested in. Yes,
Yeah.
I did try to relay that, but
Okay. This is a good conversation. I often worry, my wife and I get into tit for tat sometimes when she asks me, what's the weather? And I say, well, I'm looking outside, and then she said, no. What does it say on your phone? I said, well, I don't know what it says on the phone, but that information is a DIA. And here we are in the west side of town, so that's not going to help you too much. And so we often get into these little battles about, well, where's the data actually coming from that actually meets my local need? And I think that's part of the problem that Hernan has raised in his questions. And we'll just keep coming back to this, because I think that's really at the crux of the matter too, is providing data that's locally specific and actionable. Is the data that we now get that's easy to access through apps and whatnots or on your phone, is that actually actionable? You want actionability here. I think, is that fair to say that maybe it's the actionability that's in question?
yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Marty. Well
All right,
said.
that's great, Miriam, because I totally get that. I totally get that. That's the debate we have at home all the time. If we're okay with this subject for now, we'll return to it. Obviously, this is going to be ongoing all year for us. Brett, if you're okay, we can. I'd like Mike to introduce himself.
No, Hunan, he dropped off.
Oh, so he did.
Did Hernan drop off?
Let's see. I thought it was just my screen. Hernan, do you know that you are not visible to us right now? Maybe your internet connection.
He's trying to get in.
He's trying to get back in.
Oh, okie doke. There he is.
Is he back in?
Yeah.
I think he's back. What? We might have to unmute him. Great.
Heidi, you still there? Yeah.
Hernan, can you hear us now?
Oh, there you go.
Soft mute.
That's the shortest term on the board we've had of any person. He was on for about an hour and 5 minutes.
Is he back now? Yeah, I think he's
Yeah.
back.
It's a great contract if you can get it.
7 minutes. So what were we doing? Was I introducing
Well,
myself?
yeah, just introduce yourself and what your interests are and how long you've been on the board and when you want to become president of the United States, things like that.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. My computer just 100% just died.
No worries.
My bad.
You're back now. Our puppy like ripped the router out of, unplugged the router on me during a Zoom call a few weeks ago.
We both got puppies at the same time. They seem to do the same things too, it sounds like.
They do. Yeah, Hernan, it's nice to meet you. I'm Mike St. Clements. Let's see, I lived in Boulder for about 13 years. I have a PhD in soil biogeochemistry, and I work for the National Ecological Observatory Network, where I lead the terrestrial science team for the National Science Foundation, and I'm also a faculty member at CU Boulder. I've been on the board for, I think 4 years. I think this is my last year. And yeah, and I'm really interested. I think, we've talked about a lot of things over the last 4 years. I'm obviously interested in our soil health issues, but I'm also really interested in this urban heat island issue that we've been talking about lately. I feel like that's one of real interest to me because I feel like I don't really like the heat. And I hate when I walk around downtown in the summer and it's super hot. And I just feel like that's something that's really of interest to me too, because I feel like it's something really local and actionable that's probably easy to make a noticeable impact to the community. So that's one of the ones I've been excited about lately. And yeah, and I got a puppy at the same time recently as Marty. And I'm late because I have a daughter at a soccer game. Sorry, tonight. So, but other than that, yeah. So nice to meet you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Mike, and we're glad that you were able to make it. I think if we can move to the next item, which is something that is going to be coming back because there'll be some revisions to the Boulder climate action plan, if you will. Here, the draft document that you all should have received is called the Boulders Climate Commitment Document. It's a form of an action plan from 2017. And one thing that might be worth doing that I would like us to spend, well, we have a fair amount of time, almost 50 minutes, is to maybe discuss a little bit the contents of it so that we're familiar with it. So when we begin seeing suggestions for how to update to the next version and Brett gave us some flavor for that in a few meetings ago, and we'll hear more about that, I'm sure, Brett, from you. At least we know the context, we know the baseline as to where the community stands, at least at where it stood in 2017. And still, this is pretty much, I think, the enforced document at this point in time that's being reconsidered on some levels. Is that about right, Brett?
Yeah,
Susan has a question.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen that document.
I
Was that-
haven't either.
Oh,
I don't know.
it was in the, it was
in
linked
the,
in the,
in the agenda, I think you might actually have a link to the document.
Oh.
So
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad you missed it too then, Miriam.
no worries. Maybe you can pull it up on your screens, you know, and follow along. You know, I did a faux pas and printed it out. So there's a carbon footprint that I'll bury this in the backyard when the meeting is over. Sequester it as best as I can, but the dog will dig it up. But you know, all I wanted to really do is take us through a few elements in this, and if that's all right.
So the packet that is in the link is just the
minutes.
minutes. I've opened it many times. Yeah.
It's on the second page. It's on the first page, item 7C.
it's a clickable link.
It would have been, I guess, a little highlighting on that or something would be good.
I'm okay. I'm in the meeting invite. It's
It's
not in
It's
that.
on the agenda.
the agenda.
Oh, there it is.
And Marty, maybe if you wouldn't mind, Marty, maybe I could
Yeah.
take the lead in starting the walk through here, because I'd like to just provide a little bit of context on this.
Thanks.
So does everybody have the document now open? Or
Yeah, I'm still working on it.
okay. Well, while you're pulling that up, I think actually one of the things I'd like to do is maybe take you to page 4 of that document, because I think a little bit of historical context is actually really important to understand why you're about to see some new content and approaches in the climate action plan that the staff is working on that we'll be talking about with you next month. So is everybody now on page 4 of the timeline? Okay. So one thing that's, I think, important to have in view is the kind of history of city-based climate action and where it kind of got its start. And that really comes from, to a significant degree, the dynamics that took place around the first international binding agreement to address emissions, which was the Kyoto Protocol Agreement, which was negotiated in the 90s and approved in 1997, ironically in the Clinton administration, and the US did not sign the Kyoto Protocol. It was an issue with Congress not wanting to endorse signing it, I think. But the point was that the US did not sign that international agreement, and there were other major countries that didn't as well. And that's what really stimulated this movement of cities around the world saying, well, our government may not have signed that, but we're going to essentially say we're signing it, even though, of course, they weren't actually signatories because that was a nation state agreement. But the cities said, we're going to make a commitment to achieving this emissions reduction goal. So Boulder, as a city, passed its first resolution regarding that in 2002. And that's when we committed to achieving the Kyoto Agreement. Now remember that that agreement was to reduce emissions by 7% below 1990 levels by 2012. So we agreed to do that. And then shortly after that, it was by, I think, 2006, we published our first emissions inventory. And by the way, Boulder was one of the first cities that we were kind of in this early vanguard group of cities that said, we're going to sign this even though our nation state hasn't. And so we signed on, and we wrote our first climate action plan, I think in 2008. And we formed the community working groups that resulted in what became the tech team in 2008 and 9. And we started, and that's when the Muni effort started, because we started realizing that the only way we were going to have a deep emissions reduction was through dramatic decarbonization of the energy, of the electricity sector. And so that really kicked this whole system off. It's interesting for me, at least, that I started with the city in 2013, and I was hired to write the next generation of the climate action plan because our first climate action plan was tied to Kyoto, and the Kyoto goal date had passed. And that was the case for many other cities around the world who were signing on to this kind of climate action movement of cities. And so we started to work on our new climate action plan in 2013. And then in 2014, a whole new, and this is part of the reason why we didn't get our climate action plan done, is in the 9 months what we thought, well, I'll hire this guy and he'll write the climate action plan in 9 months and we'll move on. Well, we knew that suddenly by late 2013, 14, we knew that there was a whole new round of science that was about to be issued. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, issued its next report in 2014. And that's the report that said, well, folks, things are getting a lot worse. And so we're going to actually have to achieve a much more ambitious emissions reduction target. So now we need to be achieving 80% emissions reduction by 2050. Well, that was obviously a huge jump from a 7% emissions reduction to an 80% emissions reduction. But the good news was, well, we had till 2050 to get there. So I remember very vividly these conversations in the city, like, we don't really know what the pathway to 80% emissions reduction actually could be for sure. But the argument was, well, we should set the ambition and we should show that we're committed to that. And we have time, we have till 2050. And so that's the goal around which this plan was built, an 80% emissions reduction by 2050. And we'll see this as we go forward. And meanwhile, the city was putting in place all these additional measures. We started the Energy Smart program in 2010. We issued the first net zero building code trajectory in 2014. We launched smart regs in 2014, the rental building improvements. And then by 2016, we did the universal building ordinance for commercial and industrial spaces. And we continued to work on the muni pieces. And then after this plan was done, in 2018, the IPCC issued, and I should say, right after this plan, right as we were getting this plan done, we had the Paris climate meetings, right? One of the most historic meetings on climate, well, the most historic meeting on climate ever. 196 signatories to 2 degrees or less, or what, supposedly around 1.5 degree commitment, right? And quasi-binding, well, not so binding, but commitments. So that happened in 2015. So there was a sort of sense of like, okay, the world is getting itself together to really take this on. And this was shortly after the 2014 IPCC report. So it's like, okay, we're aligning with that science. Then in 2018, the IPCC issued its next report, which said that basically we weren't anywhere near to be on track to the commitments that were made in Paris in 2015. And they basically, they completely upended the existing understanding of what climate action had to be by saying, what we need to now tell you is that it's getting worse still, and that emissions reduction alone will no longer be enough. Everything up to that point had been framed in the context of emissions reduction. And then in 2018, the IPCC says that won't be enough. We've already put so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The only way we can get there is to still do all that emissions reduction, and even faster. Really, by late 2030s, we have to be down to that 80% number. And we have to be implementing carbon drawdown sequestration efforts and rapidly growing them to the scale that, in fact, if you read that report and you do the numbers, it says that we have to create a carbon drawdown economy that is as large as all of the fossil fuel industries on the planet today, based on the amount of money that carbon would be worth to draw it down, to achieve stabilization. And they said in this 2018 report, climate change will now advance at such a rate that we have to prepare our communities for significant disruption. So that is the most recent science that we now have to respond to building new climate action plans around. And that if you take that science and say, what does that mean in terms of a goal that we should be setting? That's really meaning that society should be at something like net zero by 2035. And so the conversation that's actually been taking place in a whole bunch of cities is, should we come out with a new climate action goal of net zero by 2035? And this basically, I think, has finally fully revealed a fallacy that we got started with in the very beginning of the movement of city-based climate action, which is that a city can act like a nation state, which it ultimately, of course, cannot. When we signed on to Kyoto, it was a 7% emissions reduction by 2012. We thought, well, maybe there's enough things that we can work around the edges that we have control of that could achieve that level of reduction. But now we're talking about essentially a net zero goal, a huge proportion of which, the actions of which we don't control. We don't control the whole energy grid. We don't control the dynamics of the transportation system. And there are whole aspects of the consumption system, by the way, that are now implicated in climate in ways that weren't before, that we don't control either. So the point I'm reaching is this. Part of what you're going to hear from staff next month is that we're going to be saying to council, the city is not a nation state, and we cannot set a net zero 2035 goal and be able to accomplish that by actions only within our boundaries. That's simply an impossibility. And that we have to rethink our model of what the city's role in climate action is and how cities start to create or support the more fundamental systemic change that has to happen for the whole species, the whole societies, to be able to achieve this goal. Because obviously the other thing that's true, and this is something I'll send out the memo we wrote for council in 2019, and it's a very important, I think, foundational document for what we're going to be talking about next month, because part of what it says is that the research now shows that this notion of cities on the hill, like if Boulder can do it, then everybody else will do it, as Hanan has been saying, like that doesn't necessarily work. That's not the system that makes change. It's almost like that same old, it's basically sort of the myth of individualism taken to the city's level. It's like, well, if Marty can get solar panels and an electric vehicle, then I guess I can too. Well, no, that's not actually true. I mean, if all other circumstances are the same, but there are many, many people who are not in our privileged position to be able to do all those things. And so one of the things we said in the 2019 memo is we have to make it so that the right thing to do is the easy thing or the only thing to do, as opposed to now where the right thing to do is often the most expensive and the most difficult thing to do. So I wanted to set that context of what the historical evolution of city-based climate action is as we now look at this plan, and then set the stage for what we'll be coming back to discuss with you next month as we prepare to go to council on June 8th. Yeah.
Maybe just to add a little color, because we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of the first IPCC report, something's called the FAR report. The first assessment report was released in 1992. I have it on my screen here. One of the interesting comments that was recommendations that came out of the report, this is a decade before Kyoto, was long-lived gases will require immediate reductions in their emissions from human activities of over 60% to stabilize their concentrations at today's level, 1992 levels. So in 1990, the greenhouse gas emissions were on the tune of, if I have my units right, something like 3.5 gigatons per year, or maybe it's 35, I forget where my decimal point belongs there. Today, they're about 40% higher. So rather than being 60% less as per recommended, they're 40% higher. Most of the increase scales are global population. So if you look at a graph of global population since 1990, you come up with almost the same ratio. So, you know, some of the headwinds we have is that we have an ongoing world that's becoming more populated and that's becoming more advanced in its use of fossil fuels, but not necessarily somewhat more efficient, to be sure. In fact, it looks like by 2015, we've almost peaked on our rate of emissions. We haven't really grown that much globally since about 2015, 2016. Not going down, but it seems to have found a certain plateau. And I don't know if that's a permanent plateau or not. There's some questions about whether that's going to be true or not. But it's by no means the 60% reduction that was recommended by the first IPCC 30 years ago.
Yes, that's right. I mean, so in 2019, and some of you might remember, I sent you a sort of non-public draft of an introduction in January. In 2019, the UN put out what they call the Gaap Report to look at what the progress has been since the IPCC. And basically it says that the gap continues to be enormous and that we're nowhere near where we need to go. So part of all this is just to say, globally, we're starting to realize that this incrementalist approach is not going to get us there, and we need to be thinking about an entirely different approach. So let me just take you through a few high points in this document so that we can be able to contrast with the one you're going to see. Yes, Susan.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on the timeline, and this may be a reflection of the fact that I'm probably older than everyone on the call, and I remember the 60s, but to me, to say Boulder's history and accomplishments to date with regard to climate start in 2002 really kind of understates the issue to me, that since the 60s or maybe even the 50s, Boulder has taken aggressive climate action in the form of an open space tax and our blue line policies and our bike paths. And, you know, I think some reference to the fact that, yeah, this has been our response since climate change has become so acute, but we have a heritage in Boulder of strong climate action. So that's number one. I think that there should be some reference at least to that. And number two, when I look at climate action here, I don't see any reference to the city's attempts to have a municipally owned electric system, which was going to be one of the biggest things to contribute. And voters voted for that several times. And it seems like that ought to be captured in the history and accomplishments.
Yes, absolutely. And what I would say is, I mean, I think some of us believe that we succeeded despite not realizing, or that our municipalization efforts succeeded in ways that we hadn't anticipated, even though it failed, as according to some in others. But because of the municipalization effort, we pushed Excel to go far further than they would have, and that they now have created reductions that are benefiting us far more than if it were just Boulder, because it's across their entire service territory. So absolutely, Susan.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that should be captured here. And I think there should be some reference to decades of history and accomplishments, even if it's not captured in this timeline.
Yeah, well, again, I think this is a little bit, just as a sidebar, it's a little bit of an interesting point that our department used to be called Climate and Sustainability, which meant that it recognized that we were working on both climate things and other things that are not, I mean, yes, in some ways you could say everything relates to climate, but then there are other things like ozone pollution. And I think one of the interesting dilemmas that I think we have in society right now is that in some cases we've become so focused on the climate piece that we miss other local environmental issues like air quality. Because we're so focused on CO2, we're not realizing like our kids are getting asthma because of ozone. Mm-hmm. So I just think we have to be cautious to not lose sight of some of the other environmental things that Boulder has been leading on in addition to climate. So I entirely agree with that.
Okay. And just one other quick thing. I'm so sorry. I did not see that this was on tonight's agenda, because I would have liked to have reviewed it in advance. And I unfortunately have a conflict, so I need to sign off in about 5 minutes. So I wonder what the timeline is for this, if we need to have like an interim meeting to review it, because this is, to me, a really important document.
Well, it's an important historical document, Susan, but what I'm saying is that this is not the foundation of what we're saying going forward. This is what we said for our plan up and was submitted in 2016. So it's valuable for you to look at it, but you'll be getting something else.
All right.
Yeah.
And my apologies that I have to leave early. I have a hard conflict.
No worries. Just a quick comment on this document or the document that's going to replace it. Sometimes people look at the climate change as something that's yet to happen in a material way. They always hear about how bad things will be in the future. And there's an image in here, for example, that Boulder will look like Albuquerque. And by the way, I like Albuquerque, but I resent that image. I don't think it will, but that point aside, it will be, you'll hear more of this coming out of the press in coming months, is the verification of the projections that were rendered 30 years ago by the scientific community. Now you can verify 30 years ago, the forecasts were that the global temperature would rise by 1 degree Celsius by 2025 relative to 1990. As we sit now, they're up by about 0.85 degrees Celsius. So it's going to hit the mark remarkably well. The prediction was that land would warm twice as fast as the oceans. And indeed, land temperatures have risen about 1.7 degrees Celsius compared to oceans, which because of the thermal inertia. So, and then other things, the Arctic would warm even more than the rest of the land would warm. So there is a skill, a record of skill that should inform the urgency when the forecasts are that these are going to continue at a certain clip, because there now is a good track record of doing the science and doing it skillfully. And sometimes that gets lost because we're always talking about year 2100 or 2070 to 2100. People say, well, that's then. They don't know what they're talking about. So I think there's space to be made here for establishing a track record of guidance that has come to pass with remarkable degree of skill.
Well, but it also illustrates another important point, Marty, which I think we were talking about in a similar way during the air quality discussion, which is that I think for a long time, there has been a presumption that if we can just give people better information, then they will fully recognize the degree of the problem, then they'll act. And that's clearly not the case. I don't think that this is necessarily an information deficit problem. It's in fact, the analysis that we're going to give to you is that fundamentally it's a systemic problem. When the easiest and cheapest and most accessible way for you to get across town is a combustion vehicle, and in fact, because of your income class, you can't afford a high efficiency in combustion, then that's what you're going to drive.
Exactly,
if the thing that heats your house is natural gas and it's the only and you can't afford an $8,000 heat pump, then that's what you're going to heat your house with, right?
Exactly, and it's like the choices that result in we're ending up where we want to be, that have to be the most convenient, easy ones. And that's how you have to shift it so that those are the convenient, easy ones for people.
That's
Otherwise, people aren't going to do it.
Brett, I wanna ask, how involved is City of Boulder, if at all, with the greenhouse gas roadmap that came out through the state? And how is the city coordinating with that? And also, there's some bills that are going through the AQCC in the next month or so around the greenhouse gas budgets around transportation. Is the city involved with that at all?
Yes. So in fact, we've said that unexpectedly, in some ways, our most effective climate action work has been the role that Boulder has taken in leading the policy pieces that the state ended up developing. Actually, right now, the state's climate action plan is more ambitious than ours, in part because we helped to lead, and we, in fact, Boulder and Boulder County created this organization called Colorado Communities for Climate Action, CC4CA. And that group was one of the instrumental bodies in helping to develop and lobby for that state level policy. So part of what we're really getting to is, yes, we want to encourage energy efficiency locally. Yes, we want to keep pushing our building codes, but until and unless we can actually change policy and law and markets at state and national levels, then people are going to keep getting these perverse incentives.
Right.
They're acting rationally in an irrational system, right? That's the context of most people's lives. And I think that this notion that for a long time, decades, frankly, we've been saying, well, it's all about personal behavior change. Well, no, people are acting rationally in an irrational system. So I think what I'm trying to illustrate in part is that this plan was really developed in a different paradigm of thinking around where we need to go. But I also just want to set the frame. So you'll see, in fact, on page 5, what our goals were that we set for ourselves during this plan. This was the 80% emissions reduction by 2050, 100% renewable energy by 2030. This was a part of what was the driver to keep pushing for the Muni project. There was no path by which Excel could achieve 100% renewable electricity by 2030 at that time. We'd asked them repeatedly to do so. There actually is now. That's how much our advocacy and the systems have been changing between now and then. I do want to actually go to page 7. This is the page that Marty was saying he took some offense to. This characterization of what Boulder would look like. That's actually, I think you're right in this, Marty. We shouldn't have said what Boulder would look like, but this came from the Western Water Assessment.
Yeah.
And it was their report is to say, what would the climatic conditions in Boulder be like? Not what its landscape would look like,
Yes.
but by their projections, our climate will look more like Albuquerque's than what we customarily experience as Boulder by roughly 2050. And frankly, we're on this trajectory or an even more extreme one now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's the landscape. And I worked some with the university on the West, because I used to manage the Western Water Assessment before 2010. So this was always a matter of some contention as to what one puts in to illustrate.
Right.
So
right.
there's drama involved in this, right?
Right.
There's a little shock effect going on.
This, in fact, Jeff Lucas told me, like, this is as much drama as we can ever do. Right. So
Some drama.
I think one of the most, in fact, if you'll go to page 9, one of the most important things I want to point out to you about this document was this was our effort to take the very confusing array of all the things that you could conceivably do to be taking climate action and distill it down into, in this case, 3 categories. So, because people were like, should I ride my bicycle or not eat meat or get solar panels, or like, what's the most important thing to do? And like, how does it all fit together? And we sort of synthesized this down to say, there's basically 3 broad areas of climate action that we should be taking: energy systems change, the material economy and consumption, and ecosystems. So this was a kind of major step in our climate thinking and how we have organized ourselves, that you'll continue to see these 3 major categories. We would call them the sort of 3 causal areas of climate change: the emissions coming from energy systems, the emissions caused by the consumption-based economy, and frankly, the emissions from decarbonizing living systems. All the deforestation and all the agricultural practices have actually generated a huge amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as well. In fact, roughly we would say that it's about a third now. So what you'll see in the next generation of the Climate Action Plan is these 3 categories coming forward, as well as 2 more that the community put on the table back in 2019 when we launched this next round. And people said, yeah, we agree with all that, except there are 2 more that you're missing. One is land use, and the other is financial and economic systems. So those are 2 more categories we'll be talking about in this new plan. The last thing I want to just point out about this particular plan, the rest of it you can look through, you'll see a lot of the customary things of climate action that you're familiar with, because again, most of it that's quantifiable and specific is related to energy systems, because that's what most climate action had been up until around 2017. Is that we did pioneer another thing in this plan, which was, as sad as it is to say, equity. And it was again through community input. We had taken these 3 broad categories out to the community, and the community said, yeah, that's pretty good, except some people in the community said, yeah, but you basically miss social justice and equity. And so you'll notice at the end of this plan, there's a segment that's on community and just transition. And it turns out we were actually a little bit ahead of the curve for what's become a very big focus now in the climate action movement, which is around equity and social justice. And you'll again see that theme come forward again in the work that we're going to be presenting later. So I had more that I was going to show you, but just given the time tonight, I think I'll stop there. And if there are any questions, I mean, one of the things, again, you'll notice is that there's a lot of detail around energy system stuff. And then you start to get down into the resource piece. And it's like, well, that sort of looks like your zero waste program. Is like, yep, that's our zero waste program, trying to figure out how it's going to be more related to climate. And then you get into the ecosystems and that'll be like, well, that's pretty vague. And you're like, yep, that's right. We were just starting to think about it. And you'll get a lot more detail, I think, about those two segments in this next round of climate planning. So, yeah. Maybe, well, yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Hernan.
Yeah, so so this is like a historical document. Like this is what. So I guess, are there any ideas being floating around as to what the new approaches should be with, like you said, this is more like a global problem. Not really. There's only so much a city can do, especially now, when these goals need to be more aggressive. So what ideas are floating around in terms of what to do? Is there any path for a plan, or
Yeah, so in short, I guess what I would say is that we have to move towards more, at least state scale strategies than local. Like energy systems change, for example, we have to have the utilities being driven by the Public Utilities Commission to change it across their whole service territory versus trying to do it inside Boulder. So I'll give you a really good example in this case. In 2014 or 15, we launched one of the first efforts to look at how we would facilitate transitioning houses off of natural gas. And so we ran a whole series of pilot programs. We pumped up the incentives a lot higher from the city and the county and coordinated with the utilities to try to encourage people to get heat pumps so that they could replace their natural gas furnaces. And we learned a number of really important things. One is, if you make the incentives high enough, yes, you can get quite a number of people. Like, we increased adoption of heat pumps by 400%, but that meant that we went from 50 to 200. So, and we need to be at the scale of like 1,500 to 2,000 changeouts a year to be anywhere close to being on track. And we ran into a bunch of other things like, well, before I can even spend the $6,000 to get a heat pump, my house doesn't have I have a 1961 house. It has a 100 amp circuit or panel like that. I do not have the electrical infrastructure capable of being electrified. So how would we do that? Are we going to put the cost of that, what we would estimate per household to be probably $20,000+ to electrify a house, on the back of a single owner? Or are we going to say, no, this is a social cost that we need to figure out a social financing strategy around? The easiest of which would be to simply say to the utility, you must now take responsibility for helping upgrade every house, and we're going to negotiate with you a rate basing so that you can stretch that cost across 30 years, and then everybody will just get it done. It's the easy thing. You don't have to think about it. I don't have to pick a contractor. The utility is going to take care of it. And guess what? It's going to grow their load. It's going to be great for them in the long term. And we can spread that across the whole. That's the kind of solution now that we have to be looking for, as opposed to Boulder just increasing its incentives so that a few middle-income people can go out and buy a heat pump.
Are there any examples of other cities in the US doing this, or is it more like a completely new territory?
Well, to be quite honest with you, we actually initiated a discussion by sending out a letter to sustainability colleagues across the country saying, it's time to come out of the closet and acknowledge that we're not going to set goals like this that we can achieve. And what was fascinating was all the responses we got from people saying like, wow, I'm so glad somebody's being willing to say that, because we haven't felt safe to say that. Because who wants to be the first city to come out and say, you know what, we're not going to set 100% renewable energy or 100% emissions reduction goal by 2035 and meet it. It's not going to happen. So it's a brand new territory. I would say there are not very many places who have yet made this shift, but that's the kind of direction we're going. And what that will create the space for, I believe, is for us to stop expecting, like, will Thornton and Westminster and Lakewood suddenly adopt a net zero by 2035 goal? Not even close. But would they join in an effort to get the Public Utilities Commission to simply make the utilities move? That they probably could do. We just haven't focused on these more collective strategies opposed to every city trying to do it on its own and be the proud beacon on the hill.
A question, Brett, if I could ask, roughly half, I've seen the estimates be 45 to 60% of our carbon emissions is related to mobility and the combustion engine. As I understand it from looking at a website link to the city of Boulder, we have about 40 to 50 public electric charging stations as of 2021. People, even if those people who can afford such a car, electric car is still more expensive, but not entirely. Depends if you're willing to go for a smaller one. Will say, well, I don't want to be in such a smaller car because once I leave the city limits and I'm driving down Highway 36 or I'm doing some long distance driving, I want a vehicle that's big and safe for my family. I want it to ride high. I want it to be like a truck. There aren't many electric vehicles that are that scale, which is probably just as well because it would take more energy to build an electric vehicle that scale. That kind of starts defeating some other purposes. How do you see the city confronting the issue of the gas combustion engine via strategies revolving around electric charging station availability, and also just sort of this? I mean, this is part of the systemic problem you raise, that we are a culture that has gotten attuned to be able to buy cheap, very large cars that hold 25 gallons of gasoline so you can drive 500 miles without refueling, which you generally can't do yet with an EV. So where's the city's strategy around that?
Well, so a couple of things. What's interesting about the stimulus package that Biden's trying to get passed is that it will have massive investments in EV infrastructure. And then, as you know, the whole car makers field has taken huge leaps just recently. So was it GM that came out that said that they won't sell an internal combustion engine after 2035? VW says now 2030. So that field is going to move quickly. In fact, a field that's moving much more rapidly than we thought it would is the delivery vehicle context. That one's going very quickly. Long haul trucking is moving in that direction. So in some ways, we're seeing positive movement. I'll be very frank with all of you to say this. What I don't think we are adequately discussing is the fact that there is no soft landing now left for us. There is going to be a huge amount of climate change, and that's going to have a very significant amount of impacts all over the place, and that we're increasingly going to be compelled to consider where to put our public resources between actions that are sort of benefiting a global objective of reducing emissions and stabilizing climate, and actions which are trying to prepare our community for these now inevitable disruptions and stressors that are going to just be a part of trying to live through this period. So I think that's one of the things that, and several of you have been mentioning through the evening, this issue of resilience. It's one of the ones that it's an issue that EAB, I think, should be paying very close attention to. The city had a resilience initiative that started in 2014, and it basically has expired, partly because of a whole series of other staff transitions and things. But it's an area that we need to, and we know this in the city, but we need to pick that piece back up, find a home for it or homes for it within the organization, and consider how we're going to resource that. So when I started in the city in 2014 or 13, we were still talking about whether climate change was going to happen. So it's only been in the last few years for us to realize that we have to start figuring out how we're going to resource for this kind of disruptive stage that we're moving into. So I guess, Marty, what I would say is there will continue to be, I think, accelerating progress in technology in other places that will start to bend the curve more on emissions. My guess is it's not going to happen fast enough, and that even as it happens, we're going to have to be trying to address the changes that are coming. And I think what I also believe is true, and again, this may be an important role for EAB, is that our community probably is not yet fully emotionally prepared for the fact that this stuff is now, a lot of it's going to be sort of inevitable. We don't know exactly what form it's going to take, right? You're the first person that would tell us that, Marty. Like, we don't know whether we're going to have, torrential downpours next year or this year, but we'll know we'll have those, and we'll have droughts, and we're going to have more fires. And that's just the kind of thing we're going to have to work with. So
the fires, when you think of resilience, which is sort of like an ability to bounce back from a bad blow, the ability to recover from a disaster. Floods are going to be localized. The whole city isn't going to end up underwater in a flood. We were pretty aware of our floodplain, and there'd be some flooding damages, but it's fire that, to me, and that may or may not be climate change induced fire. We have population build out and growth into the urban core, the Wuhi region. So whatever triggers it, it's fire that concerns me. If fire rages through the city, it could certainly be at the scale of the city. And then you deal with not just a built structure concern, but the environment that's been devastated by a fire that goes uncontrolled.
Yeah, and I think that this is why, I know it's a downer conversation, so I apologize for that to some extent, but I think it's important sort of as a reality checking in this. One of the things that we're starting to realize is that we have to be much more attentive to the kinds of actions that can be intersectional to both reducing emissions and supporting stabilizing climate and helping us be resilient to change. And one of those places, as it turns out, is in managing carbon out of the atmosphere into living systems in ways that increase our ability to hold more water and create more sort of both high moisture-wise and temperature-wise buffered environments. And so, because there's a close relationship, now Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a close relationship between carbon and water. The more carbon a natural system can integrate into itself, the more water it can hold. And the more water it can hold, the more life it can create that then buffers more. And that ultimately we can actually potentially have a sort of buffering effect even at the local climatic level. So I think what you're going to see is a bigger emphasis on ecosystem related climate actions going forward, because they can have this intersectional benefit even as we continue to try to do the work to change energy systems and be more efficient with energy and so on.
And my point about fires isn't to be a downer on it, but to build it back into the discussion about our engineering of buildings.
Right.
And that they could be made not only energy secure, they could be made fire secure. So the roofing and the materials used to build new buildings or to retrofit buildings can be made much more resilient to fire than most buildings currently are in Boulder. And I know Hernan's probably thought about this somewhat and could give us some good information about not just the energy aspects and the engineering around that, but also the fire prevention related to wise building, roof, just a roof alone.
Yeah, well, and just to follow on the fire theme too, again, and for you, Mike, I think one of the things that we need to be thinking about is the more moist we can keep our local environment, the less inclined it is to these kind of extreme fire events. Mm. And so, Mike, do you think that I have accurately characterized the sort of soil, carbon, water relationships, or would you, since you're the soil scientist among us?
No, I mean, I think you're pretty accurate. So organic matter definitely increases water holding capacity, right? And fertility, and subsequently creates vegetation, which can reduce the urban heat island. Yeah, no, I think it's, yeah. I mean, you can drill down into parts of it, but that's generally it, right?
And so one thing I wanted to come back to, Mike, that you had said earlier today, I do want to pick the urban heat island piece back up again. and maybe I should say this while for Hernan's also, there's been a bit of a change in the culture of the environment of the advisory board process in the city. So in the past, citizen advisory boards were, especially, there are they call them quasi judicial boards, like planning board, that literally has the right to say something can proceed or not proceed. That's not the environmental advisory board. It's not the Parks and Rec board. You're not a quasi judicial board. You're an advisory board. That means that in the past, it's meant you operate for the benefit of council and to give staff feedback. And in that context, in the past, you wouldn't, as a board, take initiative on things. You would simply respond to the things that are brought to you for comment or feedback. In somewhat more recently, some members, in fact, a few of them from this board, or past environmental advisory board, said, look, we have a lot of expertise that can be of benefit to the city. And Miriam has actually been proving this in spades, that if you let us take some initiative, we can actually further your work. And so in some ways, the city has been starting to kind of loosen the reins a little bit for advisory boards, at least that are interested, and this has been one that's been interested, to start exploring topics that it's got an interest in. And this board has identified a few topics over the past couple of years. One of them has been soil health, another has been urban heat island, a third has been air quality, and I think has been really helping move that work forward. And just to say, Mike, to you, because you mentioned this, we've had a bit of a challenge, I think, moving the heat island piece forward, because for over a year, we have essentially been without a planning director. And that, heat island is really it's a land use issue to a large extent, and codes, but lot of, and since the sort of head of that process has been non-existent, we now have, and I think they're about 4 months in, a really good new planning director who I think is really interested in this topic.
Cool.
I think it would actually be timely for us to invite him to come to the Environmental Advisory Board and to have a discussion about urban heat as an issue. And one of the things that we were talking about, though, Marty and I, is it might be useful for us to look back at the information we had gathered and the recommendations that we had as a sort of precursor to inviting him to come to that meeting, to say, like, we've done this work, here's some recommendations we came forward with. We'd like to talk to you about how you might see, working on this issue. So
that's really encouraging, Brett. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Also, sorry, hold on.
Don't die on us, Miriam.
Air quality.
Yeah. While you're coughing, Mike, I'm embarrassed to say this. So the work we did on that preceded Heidi, who, is remarkable at keeping things organized, but she wasn't here for that. It was with, I think, when Delaney was with us, and she's no longer with us. If you have any of that information that you had gathered during that period of time that you can help me, I'm trying to figure out where to collect what we did.
I have a bunch, and Mike has a bunch.
Yeah,
I
can
think.
dig it up.
Yeah.
If you could forward me that would be really helpful.
Okay, I'll search for it in the next couple of days. Yeah, I'll get it to you.
Miriam, you had a point still to raise, I think, right?
I did. I think maybe it would be helpful for us to provide Hernan our letter to City Council.
Oh,
Is that the one from, I think I read it. Is that the one that,
you got it. Okay.
is that the one from, I think, 2019 or something? I feel like I read a letter to City Council and I talk about soil quality and urban heat island. That's how I came to think. I hadn't even thought about urban heat islands before that. So I think I got it from that letter.
Great.
So
then you've got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I read it. Thank you, though.
Okay.
I just want to say one more thing about the fire, because we're at the 150th anniversary of the most devastating fire in America that cost more lives than any fires ever caused in America. And to me, it's a lesson for for us to be very aware of. That number one is this fire, one community, the name of the community, you might recognize the name, is Peshtigo. Peshtigo is not far from where I went to school. But Peshtigo was a community of about 1,700 people, of which 800 died in a fire. A river ran through that town called the Peshtigo River, for which people fled. You'll see artwork still to this day about the devastation. People were burned in their attempt to get to the river. Even in the river, they didn't survive. The fire didn't happen in the middle of summer. It happened in October. It didn't happen in the West. It happened in the upper Midwest, a relatively humid, moist landscape. It happened because, well, there was an incredible storm that triggered winds that were on the order of 50 miles an hour that persisted for 2 days. And there had been clearing. The recent Agricultural Act had promoted the clearing of forested lands in Door County and that Green Bay area, in which a lot of the landscape was littered with debris of trees and so forth that had dried over months and years. That was convenient once ignited. This is not too far from our situation in our own backyard. So while we can talk about moist landscapes and irrigated activities and canopies in our city, believe you me, if we end up with a weather situation in which you have sustained winds of 30 to 50 miles an hour for a couple of days and a fire is triggered in the dry ecosystem to our west, which is always going to be dry and only getting drier, our challenge is not, well, how much moisture is in our landscape, in our soils here, but where will we capture the embers that are going to be flying through here, going to be flying to Longmont? The fires on the east side of Green Bay were triggered by embers that came from the west side of Green Bay. So the scale by which fire spreads is just absolutely remarkable. And so that's why I fear that in terms of resilience, we're not aware that we're focused too much on our locality, which is important. We live it locally and we have to make that a good environment. But the risk is not necessarily for fires that are sort of local, but it's wind-driven fires that are triggered many tens of miles away, even on the other side of the Continental Divide, potentially.
And we saw that last fall for sure.
Yes, we did. So hence I say, some of our built structures, can we make them more resilient to embers that come floating and drifting downwards that could otherwise trigger a fire on some of the rooftops that we have around town?
Well, I promise you, Hanan, that it isn't always quite this apocalyptic in the Environmental Advisory Board. But I think, this is an important moment as we think about this next stage of what the city should be focusing on to bring forward these kinds of issues and concerns. So
we're at 8 o'clock. I guess we should call for an adjournment unless there's a last word. Yes, Mike.
I just haven't had a chance to hear Hernan introduce himself because I was a little late. Could you just introduce yourself for my sake to Hernan? Just so
sure.
I can hear you say it. Yeah.
I'll do it really quick so we can adjourn. Okay. My name is Hernan Villanueva. I'm originally from Peru. I came here when I was 17 to Kansas to study engineering. And then after I graduated, I came to CU Boulder to get my PhD. And I've been living here since then. So I've been here for like a decade, almost a decade now. And currently I'm working for a lab in California. And I'm just working, I was able to work out a deal where I could, work from Colorado. So that's nice. And as I told everybody else, I'm interested in near net zero residential homes and buildings. Just try to improve the efficiency of new construction through building code, and to also work in a way that if we implement any program, like Brett said, not only be like this light on the hill, but actually be able to reproduce this across other cities, counties, or the state level, or just work together with them so we can implement better things that are more effective.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks, and I look forward to working with you and getting to know you. That's cool.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I have one
Yeah, Mary.
reminder.
Heidi.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I sent an email out to EAB on Monday that had 2 sessions for boards and commissions trainings. They are meant to onboard the new board members, but all board members are invited. And one is scheduled for tomorrow, April 8th from 6 to 9. The second one is scheduled for this Saturday from 9 to noon. And I did send an email out to everyone with the information, but if you have any questions, let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heidi. So I guess to close the meeting, do we adjourn with a second to formally close the meeting?
Second.
There we go. Thank you. That's great. Make sure we note that Hernan closed the meeting with the second. That was a breakthrough. All right. So next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, May 5th, according to my notes. And hope to see you all then. Just as a quick, will we expect to maybe go any more through the climate action plan and the 2017 draft? Because not everyone had seen it. Maybe we can add that to the agenda just to cover bases that perhaps we didn't do enough in this meeting. Does that seem reasonable? Just as a think ahead a little bit, that we might still touch bases on that. Okay, good enough. See you all. Have a great rest of the week, huh?
Thank
Thank
you.
you, guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Good
Bye.
to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.